welcome back to whispers in the dark. Lower the lights, draw the curtains, listen closely, and do not be too quick to dismiss what you hear as only a fairy tale, because there are stories that grow softer with time, and there are stories that grow teeth. Tonight's story is based on the old Grimm legend called The Children of Hamelin, the tale most people know as the Pied Piper of Hamelin. But the version you are about to hear is darker than the one told to children. This is the story of hunger, debt, rats, broken promises, and the sound of a pipe that should never have been heard by human ears. So settle in, because once the music starts, it does not stop for anyone. In those days, Hamelin was a town of stone, timber, smoke, and hunger. Its houses crowded shoulder to shoulder, as though afraid of the fields beyond the walls. Their upper floors bent over the lanes, black beams crossing white plaster, windows warped with age, shutters swollen by rain. In summer, the air smelled of river mud, wet straw, horse sweat, baking bread, and the sour breath of the tanneries. In winter, the roofs wore frost like funeral linen, and the vaser crawled beneath a skin of mist. The people of Hamelin were proud people. Their merchants wore good wool. Their bakers kept fat hands dusted with flour. Their councilmen walked the market square with their bellies forward and their thumbs tucked into their belts. The mayor had a house near the heart of town, a tall house with carved beams and a door blackened by years of oil and weather. His grown daughter lived there too, a pale young woman with watchful eyes, a silver chain at her throat, and hands that always looked cold. She was too old to be counted among children by some, too young to be safe from songs by others. By daylight, Hamelin seemed blessed. Church towers watched over it. Bells tolled across the roofs. The market stalls spilled apples, onions, cabbages, ribbons, iron tools, smoked fish, and hard cheeses into the square. Children ran between carts. Dogs slept under tables. Women shouted from windows. Men argued over grain, salt, taxes, and God. But beneath all this life, there was movement. At first, it was only a scratching under the floorboards. A widow heard it one evening while she sat by the hearth mending a sleeve. She paused, needle held between her fingers, and listened. Scratch, scratch, scratch. She thought of a loose twig scraping against the wall outside, though the night was still. Then the sound multiplied. Scratch beneath her stool. Scratch behind the cupboard. Scratch inside the very wall beside her bed. When she lifted a candle and bent toward a crack between two planks, a black eye stared back at her. She screamed, dropped the candle, and by morning every loaf in her house had been gnawed hollow. The bread crusts remained round and perfect, but inside them was nothing but tunnels, droppings, and small red smears where the vermin had chewed one another in their feast. After that, the rats came openly. They poured from gutters in oily streams. They nested in flour bins, crawled through cradles, spoiled beer, and died in wells. They bit through sacks of grain as though grain were paper. They gnawed the lips of sleeping drunkards. They dragged strips of meat from butchers' hooks and left the hooks swinging gently in the dawn. They came in gray, brown, black, large as kittens, thin as knives, blind with sores, slick with river slime, their tails whipping like worms cut from a corpse. At night, they ran along the rafters above beds. Their claws made a dry rattling sound, like hailstones made of bone. Children woke to find rats sitting on their blankets, washing their whiskers with tiny pink hands. Mothers learned to sleep with sticks beside them. Bakers kept cats until the cats vanished. Then dogs vanished. Then hens. Then infants were watched every hour, because no one liked to say aloud what the rats had begun to smell. The town tried everything. They set traps baited with cheese, but the traps snapped shut on nothing. And in the morning, the cheese was gone. They brought in cats from villages outside the walls, but the cats would not hunt. They arched their backs, hissed at empty corners, and fled toward the gates. They smoked burrows, flooded cellars, prayed before saintly relics, scattered poison, and hired men to club the creatures in the alleys. Still the rats multiplied. They came through church doors during Mass and moved in a thick living carpet beneath the pews. A priest lifted the cup and saw a rat crouched on the altar, its whiskers wet with wine. It did not flee. It opened its mouth as though to sing. Soon Hamelin had no silence. It had only gnawing. The people began to change. Their faces hollowed. They chewed each word before speaking, as if words too might be stolen. Men accused neighbors of hiding clean grain. Women accused midwives of bringing curses. The mayor's council chamber stank of old sweat and fear. Rats ran inside the walls there too, scratching through every meeting, every oath, every useless decree. The mayor was not a cruel man in the way of knives and fires. He was cruel in the way of ledgers. He believed every life in Hamelin could be measured, counted, balanced, and taxed. He believed hunger was a number, and grief was a public nuisance. When citizens begged for help, he promised inquiries. When mothers wept, he spoke of order. When the rats came up through the rushes on his own floor, he stamped on one until its skull split beneath his shoe and called for another cup of wine. His daughter saw more than he did. She saw rats gathering at the corners of rooms and watching her father speak. She saw how they stopped moving whenever the word payment was mentioned, as if they understood commerce. She saw one pale rat sitting outside her chamber door 3 nights in a row, its forepaws folded on the threshold like a penitent thing. When she threw a shoe at it, it did not run. It smiled. On the 4th night of the plague, a baker's boy was found in an alley behind the grain market. He was alive, but he had lost 2 fingers. He said the rats had whispered to him from a drain. He said they had told him a man was coming. No one believed him until the morning the stranger arrived. He came when the fog had not yet lifted from the Weser. The guards at the gate later said they saw him walking through the gray with no horse, no pack, and no shadow they could swear to. He was neither young nor old at first glance, or perhaps he was both. His face was lean, almost handsome, though not in a way that comforted the eye. His mouth looked as if it had learned smiling by studying wounds. His hair was dark and damp around the edges of his hat. His boots were stained with road dust and river silt, though he left no prints on the wet stones. His coat was what every witness remembered. It was made of many-colored, bright cloth, so vivid that the town seemed to fade around him. Red like fresh blood in a basin, yellow like candle flame behind thin skin, green like mold in a crypt, blue like lips after drowning, violet like a bruise on a dead child's cheek. The patches did not match, yet together they moved as though the coat were a living thing, each color shifting when he breathed. At his side hung a small pipe, or fife, polished smooth by fingers. Some said it was silver, some said bone, some said it was carved from something that had once grown inside a person. The stranger crossed the market square while the people watched from doorways and windows. Rats watched too. They came out from under barrels and gathered along the walls, whiskers trembling. The stranger looked down at them and bowed, as a nobleman might bow before honored guests. Then he asked to be taken to the mayor. In the council chamber, the mayor sat beneath a beam black with smoke. Around him stood men of wealth and worry. Their sleeves were chewed, their eyes were red. The mayor's daughter stood behind him, half hidden in shadow, one hand gripping the back of his chair. Rats moved inside the walls. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The stranger removed his bright hat and inclined his head. "I am called the Pied Piper," he said. His voice was soft, not weak, but soft in the way snow is soft when it covers a grave. The mayor looked him over and frowned at the colors. "We have no need of musicians." The stranger smiled. "Every town has need of music. Yours has need of a rat catcher." At that, the councilmen stirred. One crossed himself. Another laughed too loudly. The mayor leaned forward. "You can rid us of them." "I can rid you of all mice and rats," said the piper, "for a fixed sum. There are bargains that sound simple because the devil has swallowed all the difficult words before they reach the air." The mayor named a payment. The councilmen nodded. The citizens, when summoned, cried that the sum should be paid. Yes, yes, paid gladly, paid twice if necessary, paid in silver, paid in gold, paid in bread, paid in anything so long as the scratching stopped. The piper listened. He watched their mouths. He watched their hands. He watched the mayor's daughter in the corner, and for a moment her cold fingers tightened on the chair. "Then we have a promise," said the piper. "We have a promise," said the mayor. The rats in the walls went still. The piper stepped out into the market square. Word ran ahead of him. Windows opened. Doors cracked. Children were lifted to see. Men climbed steps. Women clutched knives and rosaries. The air seemed to wait. Even the flies that lived above the fish stalls hung motionless in the pale morning light. The piper took the small fife from his pocket and set it to his lips. The first note was so low that many did not hear it. They felt it in their teeth. It passed through bone before it passed through air. The second note rose thin and sweet, winding between houses, slipping under doors, curling through keyholes, dipping into cellars, climbing chimneys, entering cupboards, cradles, coffers, barrels, boots, and beds. Then the town erupted. Rats burst from every house. They came from ovens in black clouds. They fell from rafters in writhing knots. They boiled out of wells, drains, flour bins, haylofts, privies, and church walls. They spilled from the mayor's chimney and dropped hissing into his hearth. They poured through the market square until the stones could no longer be seen. A woman fainted when a wave of them surged over her shoes and up her skirts. A butcher swung his cleaver wildly, but the rats flowed around him, untouched, their eyes fixed on the piper. He played and walked. The music did not sound joyful. It sounded necessary. It was the sound of hunger being given a road. The rats followed. Through the market square they went, past the bakeries, where the smell of bread made them tremble, past the church, where the priest stood on the steps with his mouth open, past the mayor's house, where the grown daughter pressed herself against the window and saw one white rat pause below her, lift its head, and bleed from both eyes before turning to follow the song. The piper walked toward the river Weser. The crowd followed at a distance. No one wanted to come too near the living river of vermin. The rats pressed together so thickly that those beneath were crushed. Their bodies burst under the weight of those behind them. Blood and filth striped the road. Still they came. Still they listened. The music wrapped around their small hearts and squeezed. At the river bank, the piper did not stop. He gathered his bright clothes with one hand and stepped into the Weser. The water took him to the ankles, then the knees, then the thighs. The music continued, clear as a needle. The rats reached the bank and plunged after him. They drowned by the thousands. The Weser thrashed as though boiling. Rats climbed over rats, squealing, biting, clawing at slick backs and split bellies. Their bodies rolled in the current, eyes bulging, mouths open. They made a sound like wet cloth tearing. The river turned dark with fur. It carried them in heaps against stones, under reeds, into eddies where they spun slowly, tails tangled like roots. The piper stood in the water until the last mouse leaped from the bank and vanished beneath the surface. Then he turned, waded back, and stepped onto the shore without a drop clinging to him. Behind him, the Weser bore away the plague. Hamelin rejoiced. The bells rang. The people shouted until their throats hurt. Bakers swept droppings from ovens. Mothers stripped beds and burned straw mattresses. Children danced in streets, newly visible beneath the filth. Men laughed at how frightened they had been. Women washed blood from thresholds. The mayor declared a day of thanksgiving and ordered wine brought to the square. Only the piper did not celebrate. He stood apart, his bright coat motionless in the wind, watching the townspeople rejoice over what they had promised to pay for and had not yet paid. When evening came, he returned to the council chamber. The mayor was flushed with wine. The councilmen had found their courage now that the rats were gone. Courage often returns to men when danger has been removed by someone else. The piper placed one hand on the table. My payment. The mayor smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who has discovered a locked chest is lighter than expected. My good fellow, he said, there is no need for haste. A promise has no haste, said the piper. It either stands or rots. The councilmen muttered. One said the sum had been too high. Another said the plague might have ended on its own. Another wondered aloud whether the piper had brought the rats in the first place. That idea spread around the table like spilled ink. Yes, perhaps he had done it. Perhaps he had whistled them into Hamelin, only to profit by whistling them out. The mayor's daughter, standing in the shadows again, looked from face to face and saw what cowardice becomes when dressed as reason. Father, she whispered, pay him. The mayor did not turn. The piper's eyes moved to her. For one moment, she thought she saw something beneath his face, not anger, not yet, but a deep old emptiness that had waited long before Hamelin was built, and would wait long after its stones were dust. The mayor leaned back. We will pay a fairer sum. You named the sum. Under distress. You promised. We are grateful. Gratitude is breath. Payment is coin. The councilmen laughed then, because the danger seemed gone. And laughter is often how fools lock the door behind mercy. The piper picked up his hat. I have taken your rats, he said. You may keep your gratitude. He turned and walked out. The mayor called after him, take care, rat catcher. Hamelin has laws. The piper paused in the doorway. So did the scratching in every wall of every house, though there were no rats left to make it. Hamelin has promises too, he said. Then he left, bitter and angry, and the door closed behind him without being touched. For a while, life returned. That is the cruelest part of any curse. It allows ordinary days to come back so people can believe they escaped. The people cleaned. They repaired. They counted losses. They spoke of the piper less and less, then not at all in respectable company. The mayor forbade street singers from mentioning him. Children made games of rats drowning in the Weser until their mothers slapped them silent. The mayor's grown daughter began waking each night at the same hour, hearing faint music beneath the floor, too soft to identify, too steady to be wind. She searched the house. She found nothing. But every morning, there was mud on the threshold outside her chamber door. Not much, just enough to show the outline of narrow boots. By June, the fields beyond Hamelin shimmered with summer heat. Grain moved like dull gold beneath the wind. The river smelled green and heavy. Flies returned. The drowned rats were gone from the banks, but fishermen found pale bones tangled in their nets, tiny ribs and skulls with orange teeth. Some swore the bones clicked together when the moon was full. The mayor grew impatient with grief he had not suffered. He declared the town restored. He ordered prayers of thanksgiving. He sat in church with his daughter beside him and sang loudly. She did not sing. She watched the church door. On the morning of June 26, St. John's and St. Paul's Day, Hamelin woke beneath a sky so clear it looked polished. Some later said it was 7 o'clock when he returned. Others, shaking and old before sunset, swore it was noon. Time is unreliable when terror enters it. Clocks lie, bells tremble, shadows point the wrong way. The townsfolk were assembled in church. The mayor sat in his place, stern and satisfied. His grown daughter sat near him, hands folded so tightly her knuckles shone. Mothers bowed their heads. Fathers murmured prayers. The priest lifted his voice. Outside, Hamelin stood bright and nearly empty. The piper came back dressed as a huntsman. His many-colored coat was gone. In its place, he wore green, the green of deep woods where sunlight dies before reaching the ground. His boots were black. His face was dreadful. Not ugly, exactly. Worse, it looked as if joy had once lived there and had been scraped away with a knife. Upon his head sat a strange red hat, bright as a wound that refuses to close. He stood in the market square and took out his fife. No rat hurt him. No mouse trembled. This time the note climbed. It climbed over rooftops. It slipped through church glass. It crept under schoolroom doors. It entered the dreams of infants and the games of children old enough to run. It was sweet, so sweet, that those who heard it later said sweetness itself became hateful to them forever. Honey made them ill. Lullabies made them weep. Bird song drove them indoors. The first child to step into the street was a boy of 5 with curls damp from washing. He had been stacking wooden blocks in a corner while his mother prayed in church. He rose without blinking and walked out the door. Then came 2 sisters from a baker's house, flour on their sleeves. Then a carpenter's son. Then a girl carrying a doll with no face. Then more. They came from courtyards, gardens, kitchens, lofts, and lanes. Boys and girls from their 4th year on. Some smiled. Some wept silently. Some held hands. Some walked barefoot over stones sharp enough to cut them, but did not seem to feel pain. Their eyes were open, but they saw something no adult would ever see. A meadow, perhaps. A feast. A dead mother waving from a hill. A white road through a blue country. The song gave each child the bait that fit the hidden hook inside the heart. Among them came the mayor's grown daughter. Those who later spoke of her said she moved like a sleepwalker, but smiled like a bride. The silver chain at her throat flashed in the sun. Her father's house door stood open behind her. She had left without cloak, gloves, or prayer book. Her hair hung loose down her back, and as she crossed the square, she lifted one hand toward the piper, as though recognizing an old friend. The piper did not look at her. He played and walked. The children followed, not in a wild rush, not in panic. That would have been easier to forgive. They moved in a calm procession, a bright river of small faces, pale hands, ribbons, caps, aprons, and Sunday shoes. The town cats watched from walls. Dogs crawled under carts and whined. The wind died. Even the flies above the market stalls seemed to hang frozen in the air. A nursemaid saw them. She had been carrying a baby in her arms near a side lane, late to church because the child had soiled its swaddling. When the music touched her, she felt her knees soften. The baby in her arms stopped breathing for one terrible moment, then began to laugh. Not a baby's laugh, a thin laugh, a knowing laugh. The nursemaid looked toward the market square and saw the piper leading the children toward the gate. She followed at a distance. She did not know why. Perhaps she meant to stop them. Perhaps she was already under the edge of the spell. She walked behind the last row of children, clutching the baby so tightly it whimpered. She tried to shout, but her voice would not rise. The music had laid a finger on her tongue. The procession passed through the streets. Windows watched them. Empty doorways watched them. The stones watched them. They went by the lane that would one day be called Bungelosenstrasse, though no one yet knew that music would be forbidden there. No dancing allowed, not even at weddings, because a road that has carried away children is never only a road again. At the church, the congregation sang. Inside, the mayor's voice rose above the others. He did not know his daughter had left the pew. He did not know his town was emptying behind his back. The piper led the children through the Osterter gate and out of Hamelin. The nursemaid reached the gate and saw them moving across the fields toward the mountain. Poppenberg stood in the distance, also called Koppenberg by some, though that morning it seemed to have no proper name at all. It rose from the land like the back of a buried beast. The grass around it shone too green. The stones on its slope looked like teeth. The music grew softer, but the children heard it perfectly. The nursemaid tried again to cry out. This time, a sound came, a broken moan. The baby began to scream. That scream saved her. It tore through the music enough for her to stagger. She looked down at the child in her arms and saw blood trickling from its nose. Then fear returned to her body all at once. She turned and ran back toward Hamelin. Behind her, the piper climbed. The children followed him up the slope. There were 130 of them in all, though no one counted them then. No mother stood with a ledger. No father marked names on parchment. The number came later, when grief had sharpened itself into record. At the foot of Poppenberg, a child stumbled. He was a little boy in shirt sleeves, having come out without his jacket. The morning air had been warm, but on the slope a cold wind moved. He shivered. Perhaps the cold reached a part of him the music had not sealed. Perhaps his mother's voice, remembered from some other morning, slipped through the song. He stopped, looked down at his bare arms, and whispered that he must fetch his jacket. No one answered. The piper played. The little boy turned back. He walked down the slope, then ran, then stumbled into the road, crying without knowing why. By the time he reached the place where he had left his jacket, the music had faded from him. He remembered only color, a red hat, and a door opening in stone. Two others lagged behind. One was blind. The world had always been sound to that child, shape made from echoes, love made from footsteps, danger made from breath. The piper's music filled the darkness with paths. The blind child followed as far as small feet could manage, smiling, because the song had painted visions more beautiful than sight. But stones turned underfoot. The slope became difficult. The child fell, rose, fell again, and the procession moved on. The other was mute and had heard nothing. That child saw only the piper walking, the children following, the mountain waiting. Perhaps curiosity pulled where music could not. Perhaps fear did. The mute child followed until terror overcame wonder. When the stone opened, when the black seam appeared in the hill, the child stopped and clapped both hands over a mouth that had never spoken. The blind child could later tell that the piper had played, but could not point to the place. The mute child could point to the place, but could not tell what had been heard. That was how Hamelin learned the shape of its punishment, in fragments, in halves, in wounds that did not match. At the mountain, the piper lowered his fife. For the first time, the children stopped. Before them stood a wall of stone. It had no gate, no door, no carved hinge. Only two stones on either side of the slope leaned like crosses, one to the left and one to the right, as though the hill had already buried something holy and wished to mock it. The mayor's daughter stepped forward. Her eyes were wet, though she still smiled. The piper touched the stone with the end of his fife. The mountain opened, not with thunder, not with cracking. It opened like an eye waking in the dark. A seam appeared, thin and black. Cold air breathed from it. The grass around the entrance bent away. The children nearest the front swayed. From within came a smell of wet earth, old bones, candle smoke, and river water. Deep inside the opening, something glimmered. Some of the children gasped in delight. Some whispered that they saw tables laid with cakes. Some whispered that they saw fields. One called for a brother who had died in infancy. One laughed and said the rats were dancing. The piper turned to face them. No one in Hamelin saw what expression he wore then. No mother witnessed whether pity crossed him. No priest could say whether he hesitated. The mountain kept that secret. But the little boy in shirt sleeves, far down the road, later dreamed of it every night until he became an old man. In the dream, the piper's face changed while the children entered. It became younger, then older, then hollow, then full of teeth. The red hat bled down his brow. The fife in his hand wriggled like something alive. The children went in. One by one, two by two, hand in hand, they entered the black seam in the hill. The mayor's grown daughter was among the last. At the threshold she paused and turned, not toward Hamelin, but toward the invisible place where the bargain had broken. Her lips moved. No one heard the words. Perhaps she said father. Perhaps she said pay him. Perhaps she said nothing at all. Then she stepped inside. The piper followed. The mountain closed. The nursemaid burst into the church during prayer, white-faced, hair loose, baby shrieking in her arms. At first, no one understood her. She pointed, she sobbed, she choked out words that made no sense. Children, music, gate, mountain, Piper. The mayor rose slowly. His daughter's place beside him was empty. A sound passed through the church, then that was worse than screaming. It was the sound of every parent looking around at once and finding absence where love had been. A bench without a boy, a corner without a girl, a shawl dropped on the floor, a wooden toy beneath a pew. The priest stopped speaking. The candles trembled. Then Hamelin broke. The people ran. They spilled from the church and into the streets, calling names. Mothers tore veils from their heads. Fathers shoved one another at the doors. Old women fell and were stepped over. The mayor ran too, though some later said he did not call his daughter's name at first. He called for guards. He called for order. Only when he reached his house and saw her chamber door standing open did he begin to scream. They found the little boy in shirt sleeves near the market, clutching his jacket, and shaking so hard his teeth bled against one another. They found the blind child near the road, face lifted toward the vanished music, saying over and over that the song had been beautiful and cold. They found the mute child at the edge of a field, pointing toward Poppenberg with one rigid arm, eyes rolled wide, mouth open in a silent cry. The townspeople ran to the mountain. They tore at the grass. They beat the stones. Men brought picks, hammers, axes, shovels, ropes, torches. They struck the hillside until sparks flew. They dug until their hands blistered and split. They called into cracks. They pressed their ears to the ground. At sunset, from somewhere deep beneath the hill, they heard children laughing. Not loudly, not happily, just enough. A mother threw herself against the stone until her forehead opened. "Elsa," she cried, though the name is not written in the old account. "Elsa, answer me." Another woman clawed earth with her bare hands until her nails peeled back. A father dug with such fury that when his shovel broke, he kept digging with the splintered handle. He found nothing but worms and roots. The mayor stood before the sealed stone and offered payment. Gold, silver, grain, his house, his office, his life. No answer came. At dusk, something seeped from the hill. Not water. It was darker, thicker, and it smelled of the Weser on the day the rats drowned. It ran over the stones in thin lines. In it floated tiny scraps of colored thread, bits of ribbon, a wooden bead, a torn piece of apron, a silver chain. The mayor saw the chain and fell to his knees. His daughter's. He picked it up, and the metal was warm as if taken from a living throat. He pressed it to his mouth and screamed into it until blood flecked his lips. That night, no one slept. All through Hamelin, doors stood open. Lamps burned in windows. Parents walked the streets carrying shoes, dolls, caps, and small shirts, as though the lost might need these things when they returned. Messengers were sent everywhere, by water and by land, asking asking if the children had been seen. Riders went to villages. Boats searched the Weser. Men combed woods, fields, roads, and riverbanks. It was all for nothing. The children were gone. By dawn, the town had changed so completely that even sunlight seemed afraid to enter it. The market square, once loud with trade, lay silent under a film of dust. The schools were empty. The church benches were wrong. Every street was too wide. Every house had at least one room where no one could bear to look. The mayor aged in a single week. His beard went white in patches. His eyes sank into his face. He ordered more digging at Poppenberg. He ordered prayers. He ordered silence when prayers failed. He had men stand watch at the hill. Some deserted by the third night. Some stayed and came back unable to speak of what they had heard. One guard said that at midnight the mountain breathed. Another said small hands knocked from inside the stone, not frantically, but politely, as children knock before entering a room. Another swore he heard the piper playing beneath the ground, and beneath that music, the squealing of rats. The mute child never spoke, of course, but drew the same picture again and again with charcoal on scraps of wood. A red hat, a black door, a line of children, 2 cross-shaped stones. Behind the door, something like a mouth. The blind child became beloved and feared. Parents came asking what had been heard. The child tried to describe the song, but words failed. It had promised home, the blind child said. Not the home one had, but the home one wanted. It had sounded like mother and feast day and warm bread, and every lost thing calling from just around a corner. Yet beneath it had been another sound, quieter and hungrier, the sound of teeth behind a curtain. The boy in shirt sleeves lived longest of the 3. He grew into a narrow man with silver hair and a habit of wearing 3 coats even in summer. He never married. He never listened to music. If a bird sang near his window, he closed the shutters. If a wedding passed, he hid in the cellar with wax in his ears. When asked what he remembered, he said only that the mountain had looked full. Years passed. Hamelin kept records, because records are what people make when they cannot make peace. The citizens wrote the loss into their town register. They began to reckon years and days from the departure of their children. A proclamation was not merely dated by the birth of Christ, but by how long it had been since the children left. Every number became a wound reopened. On the old city hall, they inscribed a rhyme telling that, in the year 1284, after the birth of Christ, from Hamelin were led away 130 children born at that place, led by a piper into a mountain. A new gate later bore Latin words, remembering the magician who had led the children from the city. Even stone was made to confess what flesh could not survive saying aloud. But confession did not end the haunting. No music was allowed in the lane through which the children had passed. In time, it came to be called Bungelosenstrasse, the drumless, soundless street. If a bridal procession came with fiddles and pipes, the musicians had to fall silent there. Imagine that, dear listener, a bride in white, flowers in her hair, bells waiting ahead. Then a sudden hush as she crossed the street of the lost. No fiddle, no drum, no flute, only footsteps and the memory of 130 children walking away. Hamelin learned to fear joy. A child laughing too loudly could make a whole room flinch. A whistle from a stable boy could earn a beating. Mothers slapped hands over lullabies before the second line. Fathers broke reed pipes and burned them in ovens. The church organ remained silent for months, then years. When it was finally played again, 3 women fainted, and 1 old man walked into the vaser before anyone could stop him. The rats did not return in great numbers, but one was seen now and then, always white, always wet, always watching the mayor. He saw it first beneath the council table, years after the children vanished. Its fur clung to its bones. River water dripped from its whiskers, though the floor was dry. It sat upon its hind legs and held something tiny in its paws. The mayor bent closer before he could stop himself. It was a child's tooth. He cried out. The councilmen saw nothing. But that night the mayor woke choking, and when servants ran in, they found his bed full of river mud. He died not long after. Some said grief took him. Some said guilt. Some said he heard a pipe at his window and opened it, though his chamber was 3 floors above the street. In the morning, he was found on the floor with both ears bleeding, his daughter's silver chain wrapped around his tongue. The chain was buried with him. 3 nights later, it was found hanging from the gate of Poppenburg, clean and shining. After that, no one in Hamelin wished to be mayor. Still, towns need mayors. They need bakers, priests, grave diggers, brides, witnesses, and liars. Life continued because life is merciless. New children were born. They grew beneath the weight of older names. No first cry in Hamelin was ever greeted with simple gladness again. Every newborn was counted against the 130. Every cradle stood in the shadow of the mountain. Mothers taught their children not to follow music. Fathers taught them that a promise was a thing with eyes. Priests preached that God sees all debts. Merchants nodded and still cheated when they could, because men may fear legends and remain unchanged. And far away, stories spread. Some said the children had been led through a cave and came out again in Transylvania, blinking under a strange sky, speaking no word of Hamelin. Some said they became the ancestors of distant people who still dreamed of a German town they had never seen. Some said they were not dead, only elsewhere. That was the kindest tale, and therefore the hardest to believe. In Hamelin, old women told another version in whispers. They said Poppenburg was hollow. They said the rats had not drowned in the vaser, but had gone ahead through water, down into the veins of the earth. They said the piper was no man, but the mouth of a bargain older than baptism. When Hamelin refused payment, the debt did not vanish. It changed shape. It grew small shoes. It learned children's names. They said that inside the mountain there is a town like Hamelin, but made of wet stone and gnawed wood. Its streets twist like intestines. Its windows shine with yellow eyes. Its church bell is a rat's skull struck by a silver bone. There the children walk forever in a procession that never ends, led by a red hat bobbing in the dark. They do not age. They do not sleep. They do not remember their mothers unless the piper permits it. When they do remember, their crying rises through the hill as laughter. They said the mayor's grown daughter walks nearest to him. She carries a ledger. In it are written all unpaid promises. Not only Hamelin, every promise, a coin owed to a beggar, a vow broken at a bedside, a hand withdrawn from a friend in fear, a wage stolen, a child forgotten, a kindness delayed until it rotted. The pages are endless, and the ink is made from river mud and blood. And whenever the ledger grows heavy enough, the piper goes walking again, not always in many-colored cloth, not always with a red hat, not always with a fife one can see. Sometimes he is a song on a bright screen. Sometimes he is a voice through a wall. Sometimes he is applause. Sometimes he is the sweet little tune a child hums without learning it. But in Hamelin, they knew him. They knew him in every silence. One winter, many years after the disappearance, a traveler came to the town after sunset. Snow lay against the walls. The gates were nearly closed. He was a scholar, or so he claimed, with ink-stained fingers and a satchel full of parchment. He had heard the legend and wanted to see the silent street, the hill, the records, the stones in cross shape. The innkeeper did not like his curiosity. Eat, the innkeeper said. Sleep, leave in the morning. But the traveler was proud, and pride is the candle fools carry into cellars. He asked questions until the room fell quiet. He wanted to know whether music was truly forbidden in Bungelosenstrasse. He wanted to know whether 130 was an exact count. He wanted to know whether the blind child had lied, whether the mute child had exaggerated, whether perhaps the whole thing had been plague, emigration, hysteria, or superstition. At the hearth, the old boy in shirt sleeves sat wrapped in coats. By then, he was nearly 90. His face had folded into itself. His eyes were pale and watery. He had not spoken to strangers in years. But when the traveler laughed at the tale, the old man lifted his head. "Do not go to the hill," he said. The traveler smiled. "Why?" "Because it remembers feet." The room emptied soon after. The traveler waited until midnight, then took a lantern and walked through Hamelin alone. The snow made the town gentle. Roofs softened. Gutters glittered. The church tower watched without ringing. He found Bungelosenstrasse by asking no one. Some streets identify themselves by smell, some by curve, some by silence. This one was silent in a way that pressed against his ears. Halfway down the lane, he stopped. His lantern flame leaned sideways, though there was no wind. From far away came a note. The traveler turned. At the end of the street stood a figure in green. The The scholar later tried to write what happened next, but the parchment was found blackened, as if every word had burned from within. He was discovered at dawn near the foot of Poppenberg, alive, hair white, boots full of mud. In his satchel were 130 small teeth, each clean as a pearl. He lived 3 days. On the first, he asked for a priest. On the second, he asked for his mother, dead 40 years. On the third, he began to hum. The innkeeper smothered him with a pillow before the tune could reach the street. No one blamed him. That is the kind of town Hamelin became, a place where mercy and murder learned to sit at the same table, because music had made monsters of memory. Now listen closely. There is one part of the tale that people forget, because it is too small beside the great horror of 130 lost children. But small things are where curses hide. The piper first came for rats and mice. He did what he promised. The people refused to pay, so he came for what the town loved most. That is the lesson told to children. Keep your word. Pay your debts. Do not cheat strangers. But lessons meant for children are often disguises for truths meant for adults. The darker truth is this: the piper did not steal Hamelin's children because he loved cruelty. Cruelty is human. He stole them because a promise, once made in fear and broken in comfort, leaves behind an emptiness that must be filled. The town opened a door when it bargained. It shut the door in his face before paying. But doors remember being opened, and something on the other side had already smelled the way in. Perhaps the piper was that something. Perhaps he was only its servant. Perhaps he too had once been a child, led into a mountain by an older song, taught to play until his own name rotted away, and only his office remained. The old women of Hamelin said there were moments, just before dawn, when one could hear him weeping beneath the hill. Not for the children, not for the rats, for himself. The mayor's daughter may have understood. In the church window made long afterward, now mostly lost to damage and time, people said her painted face was turned not toward the piper, but toward Hamelin. Her hand was lifted, palm outward, as if warning those who remained. Not farewell, not pleading, warning. Pay what you owe, not only in coin. Pay attention, pay kindness, pay grief its due. Pay the living before they become ghosts. Pay the dead with remembrance. Pay the truth by speaking it. Hamelin tried. It remembered with inscriptions. It remembered with silence. It remembered with rules for wedding music and street processions. It remembered until memory itself became a second town built over the first, a Hamelin of absence, where every doorway opened onto the same June morning. But remembering is not the same as undoing. No child came back from the mountain. Not truly. There were nights, yes, when mothers woke to find wet footprints on the floor beside their beds. There were mornings when a toy lost years before appeared on a windowsill, cold and damp. There were feast days when the smell of children's hair, bread, smoke, and summer grass moved through empty rooms and made old parents sink to their knees. Once, a woman whose 2 sons had vanished heard knocking from inside her cupboard. She opened it and found a dark tunnel where shelves should have been. From far within came her younger boy's voice. "Mother," it whispered, "may I come home?" She reached in. Neighbors found her arm buried to the shoulder in solid wood. Her face was peaceful. Her hair had turned white. Something had kissed her palm with a mouth full of needle teeth. Another time, a group of boys born after the tragedy dared one another to whistle in Bungelosenstrasse. The youngest pursed his lips and made 3 notes before his older brother struck him. The boy laughed, then stopped. He said he could taste river water. That night, all the rats in town, every hidden brown body in every wall and stable, came to his window and sat there until dawn. None entered. They only listened. The boy never whistled again. Decades became a century. People who had seen the piper died. People who had known the missing died. People who had known those who knew them died. The story should have thinned. It did not. It hardened. It became part of the town's mortar. Children learned it before they learned numbers. Brides crossed the silent street with lowered eyes. Musicians stopped without being told. Travelers asked for the tale and laughed, but softly, because Hamelin did not laugh with them. And Poppenberg waited. Grass covered old dig scars. Rain softened the cross-shaped stones. Shepherds avoided the slope. Dogs would not climb it. In spring, flowers grew there in unnatural abundance, small white blossoms with red centers. If picked, they wilted at once and smelled of wet fur. On June 26 each year, the hill changed. Birds fell silent. The air cooled. The ground seemed to pulse faintly underfoot. Those who dared stand near it heard things. Not always music, sometimes counting. A child's voice whispering, numbers up to 130, then beginning again. Sometimes a woman sobbing behind stone. Sometimes rats swimming. Sometimes the mayor's daughter reading from her ledger in a voice dry as parchment. Sometimes the piper himself, laughing softly, not because anything amused him, but because laughter was the only human sound he had not yet ruined. There was a priest, long after the first priest had gone to his grave, who decided to end the curse. He fasted 7 days. He carried holy water, relics, incense, and a wooden cross. At dawn on St. John's and St. Paul's Day, he climbed Poppenberg and commanded the mountain to open in the name of God. The mountain opened. Witnesses at the foot of the hill saw only a black seam, and the priest stepping forward. They heard him begin a prayer. Then they heard children answer in perfect unison. Amen. The priest screamed once. The seam closed. That evening, his cross rolled down the hill, chewed into splinters. Hamelin stopped trying to conquer the mountain after that. It is difficult to live beside a thing that has beaten your prayers. Yet the town endured, and that may be the final horror. children vanished. Not that a piper took them. Not that a promise was broken and paid for in little shoes. The final horror is that morning still came. Bread still had to be baked. Fields still had to be cut. Debts still had to be counted. Bobbies still had to be named in houses where older names could not be spoken without breaking the air. The people of Hamelin became experts in not listening. They heard the river and not the drowning. They heard the church bell and not the missing voices. They heard footsteps and not the procession. They heard wind along the eaves and not the pipe. But silence does not heal. It gathers. Every forbidden song sank into Bungelosenstrasse. Every unsung lullaby. Every wedding tune stopped halfway. Every child hushed too sharply. Every mother who bit her knuckles instead of crying out. Every father who closed a door and wept into his sleeve. All that silence settled between the stones until the street became full. Full things overflow. One summer night, when the moon was thin and red, the stones of Bungelosenstrasse began to hum. No person made the sound, no instrument. The street itself hummed low and soft, like a throat remembering speech. People woke and sat upright in bed. Bobbies wailed. Dogs hid. The hum grew into a tune no one admitted knowing, but everyone recognized. Doors opened. Not all doors. Only those in houses where someone had broken a promise and pretended it did not matter. A merchant who had cheated a widow found his front door open to a field he had never seen. A mother who had abandoned a servant girl to disgrace heard a baby crying from her oven. A councilman's grandson who had lied under oath saw wet footprints crossing his ceiling. None died that night, but each woke with mud on the tongue and a small bite mark over the heart. By morning, the hum had stopped. In the market square stood a pile of coins. Old coins, new coins, bent coins, foreign coins, coins green with age, coins stamped with faces no one knew. Beside them lay a scrap of many-colored cloth. The town paid for masses. The poor were fed. No one touched the cloth. It vanished by dusk. Years later, a wanderer came through Hamelin with a little reed pipe tucked in his belt. He did not know the custom. He did not know the street. He entered Bungelosenstrasse playing a cheerful tune for a group of laughing children. The children stopped laughing first. Then the tune soured. The wanderer tried to lower the pipe, but could not. His fingers clung to it. His cheeks hollowed. His eyes bulged. The music poured out faster and faster until it no longer sounded like music at all, but like rats shrieking underwater. Adults ran into the street. Someone struck him. Someone pulled at his arms. Someone prayed. His pipe split lengthwise. From inside it poured river water, black fur, and one tiny white hand made of wax. The wanderer survived, but his lips were sealed shut from that day forward, fused as smoothly as if he had been born without a mouth. The children who heard him grew old fearing all instruments. One became a bell founder and made bells with no clappers. One became a mother and never sang. One walked into Poppenberg at age 40, smiling like a bride, though no opening was seen. So the story did not end. It thinned, spread, took root in other places, wore other clothes, entered books, songs, poems, plays, and fireside whispers. People softened it for nurseries. They painted the piper quaint. They made the rats comic. They allowed the children to wander into sunlight somewhere else. They turned judgment into lesson and terror into rhyme. But beneath every softened telling lies the old Hamelin, the stinking alleys, the bright coat, the fixed sum, the refusal, the bitter departure, the return in green, the red hat, the mayor's grown daughter, the nursemaid with the baby, the blind child hearing what could not be shown, the mute child seeing what could not be said, the boy in shirt sleeves running back for his jacket and living with that mercy like a hook in his ribs, the 130 entering the hill, the soundless street, the mountain that remembers feet, and the piper, always the piper. Picture him now, because he is easy to misunderstand. Do not picture a jester. Do not picture a merry musician dancing through sunlit lanes. Picture a figure at the edge of sight where lamplight ends. Picture colors moving in cloth that no loom should weave. Picture a huntsman in green standing beneath a church window while everyone inside prays too loudly to hear him. Picture a red hat in a crowd. Picture a pipe lifted to lips that knows the shape of every secret you have ever hidden. Then ask yourself what you would hear. Not everyone hears the same tune. A miser hears coins falling into an open chest. A lonely man hears his name spoken with love. A grieving mother hears a dead child call from the next room. A hungry child hears bread cracking open. A guilty town hears nothing until it is too late. That is why the piper is feared. Not because he forces strangers to follow, but because his music knows where obedience already lives inside them. The rats followed hunger. The children followed longing. The adults followed greed, and then followed grief. Every soul has a leash. The piper only plays until it tightens. If you ever go to Hamelin, and if some narrow street seems quieter than streets should be, do not whistle there. Do not tap a rhythm on the wall. Do not hum to comfort yourself. Walk gently. Walk honestly. Keep your promises before you arrive. And if you see a scrap of bright cloth caught between two stones, leave it where it lies. Above all, if you hear music with no musician, do not look for its source. Music is a road. Some roads are mouths, and some mouths, once opened, do not close until they have been paid. Now the candles are low, and our tale has followed the piper as far as any living narrator should dare. If you listened to the end, carry this warning out of the dark with you. A broken promise may sleep for a while, but it does not die. It waits in walls. It waits in streets. It waits under hills. And when it wakes, it may not come for your gold. It may come playing softly for whatever you love most. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and like the video for more. Good night.
We whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold you close in this moment